Hello, universe. Welcome to the most spectacular wrestling podcast you will find on the internet. You are listening to Tag Me In, bro. I'm Joe Tantillo, and as always, I'm seated next to my terrific co-host, Taryn O'Connor. Say hi to the people, Taryn.
Hi to the people, Taryn.
If you're new to the show, the format is simple. Each week, we discuss all the magnificent moments, turbulent times, and stunning surprises that professional wrestling has to offer.
So turn your radio up and your opinions down, because we've got some hot tags coming up NXT, which means next.
Give me a hell yeah! I said give me a hell yeah!
Give me a hell yeah, universe, because we are back in action. Los Ingobernables de Tantillo have returned from, well, basically just being a little late with the podcast this week, but that's because we were in the most magical place on earth, Walt Disney World, celebrating John's graduation and my birthday, and we had a wonderful, wonderful time. As always, it was nice to get a little reprieve from the stress and strain of everyday life, and we had an absolute blast. Now, let me say for a second, there is so much going on in the world of wrestling in this week and the next. You got Dominion, you've got TakeOver, you've got Money in the Bank, so there is so much to talk about today. My real life bro from the same mo, John Tantillo, will be joining me as usual at BFLO Codebreaker on Twitter. Make sure you follow him. And folks, you don't want to miss out on 1 second of Tag Me In Bro content. So go on Twitter right now and follow us at Tag Me In Bro. Now, I hope everyone is excited for the show because it is about to go down in a big way. Today, tomorrow, and every day, we are talking wrestling. First things first, we'll cover the Raw Rundown, where we'll give you our analysis of the most important bits of last night's show. After that, we've got our Hi to the People segment, where we engage the audience on various wrestling questions and queries. And this week, we're asking you, what will be a better show, Dominion or TakeOver? Then we take a trip to the Indie Corner, and then after that, we move on to our main event, where we talk about the question on everyone's mind this week. And this week, that question is, what influences perspective in wrestling? We'll be talking much more about that in the main event. And finally, we close out the show the same way that we do every single episode with our stars of the night. But before we do any of that, we got to get to that Raw Rundown. Woo! Here are the only 5 things you need to know about Monday Night Raw this week. Number 5, Natalya versus Nia. Number 4, Elias and Jinder take on Roman and Seth. Number 3, the B Team are the number 1 contenders for the Raw Tag Team Championships. Number 2, Braun Strowman versus Bobby Roode. And number 1, Finn Balor versus Kevin Owens. All right, John, let's talk about Raw because a lot of people did not like it. We ran a poll and most of you said it was bad or awful. Now, we only watched the Hulu version to be fair, but from what we could tell, it wasn't horrible. There have been worse Raws, but Raw has been overall fairly weak in the recent weeks. This wasn't particularly great, but there were a few moments that were nice. Let's talk about that segment between Natalya and Nia. A pretty quick match. They're running some sort of injury angle with Natalya, which makes me think she might be removed from the women's Money in the Bank ladder match, possibly to be replaced by the likes of Bayley or someone like that. And I think she may end up interfering in the Nia versus Ronda ladder match. But overall, what are your thoughts on this section?
I'll tell you what, it's making the whole Nia Ronda thing a lot less predictable, which I really enjoy. Before it was kind of like, oh, well, maybe Natty's just going to win the briefcase, Ronda's going to win and cash in and blah, blah, blah. It'll be a whole thing. But now that they're doing this injury angle, there's a lot more intrigue, a lot more room for more interesting storytelling. Like you said, maybe Bayley could work her way into the Money in the Bank ladder match, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think it's bringing some freshness to what was feeling pretty stale. I have no idea what's going to happen in this match once the championship match once we get to Money in the Bank, and it gives it a little bit more unpredictability, which I like, as you know. So number 4 is Elias and Jinder versus Roman and Seth. Elias is taking on Mr. Seth Rollins, the Architect, at Money in the Bank for the Intercontinental Championship, while Roman Reigns will be taking on Jinder Mahal, the modern-day Maharaja. This is a matchup that came out of sort of nowhere. And basically, Elias was running his mouth, and Seth came out, and then Jinder came out, and they were beating him up, and then Roman came out. Blah blah blah. Long story short, wasn't the worst forced tag match of all time. It happened. It just gives a little more of a rivalry between these two teams, but not necessarily something that it was a must watch for me.
Elias got a pin over Rollins, which I think is a smart move in their build-up. He hit him with a DDT onto a steel chair. Protects Rollins, makes Elias look strong. Probably going to cheat to win at Money in the Bank, which I think could be a good choice. I'm really enjoying this feud that they've got going on, and yeah, good stuff.
Number 3, you had the B team becoming the number 1 contenders. There was an over-the-top rope battle royal for tag teams where if one member of your team was eliminated, you were out. So obviously the favorites going in was McIntyre Ziggler. Ziggler got thrown out right away, to which McIntyre responded by being kind of pissed off at Ziggler, but then they cleaned house, smashed some people up. They obviously are being held in a holding pattern until they actually want to take the titles off of Bray and Matt or split up this team. Not 100% sure which direction it's going to go, but the B team came out victorious. This is really fun. Bo Dallas and Bray Wyatt are brothers in real life. I actually would love to see the B team become part of the Woken family in the long run. Like, if they fight this battle and then lose, these guys are not, in my opinion, championship material, but I do think that they have had a run, including their time as the Miztourage, that they deserve to have this championship opportunity, so I'm glad to see them get it. Should be a pretty decent match. Curtis Axel is a really good wrestler, for those of you who don't know, as is Bo Dallas. So yeah, this is fun for them. Yeah, what do you think, John?
No Authors of Pain in this Battle Royal, which is a huge thing to note. They're still not being used on Raw right now, which I've got a lot of feelings about. I think if they don't have anything for them, they shouldn't be being used, but why aren't you using them? They're so good. I love them. But yeah, I think B Team was the right choice to win this. McIntyre and Ziggler will have their day. That is not the time for them right now, but overall, a fun segment. It's good to see these guys get a few more wins.
Not a fan of the Authors of Pain being completely MIA, as we have talked about before. And, I also have problems with Sanity being MIA. But I guess if they are not going to be around, why not the B Team? Why not Zoidberg? Anyway, number 2, you had Braun versus Bobby Roode, not Bobby Lashley, who was in a terrible segment that does not make this list. Anyway, Braun, this match was fine. Braun won. He's great. Bobby Roode needs to be a heel. We say it every single week. He is just so boring as a face. He's just a smiley guy. Why they decided to completely butcher his character, I will never understand. Maybe it'll turn around at some point. Anyway, you got Braun, had a spectacular spot in this match where Bobby laid out the ladder, and Braun just smashed through it with his fists, which was freaking hysterical. Another gifable moment from him. He is just great. I'm sure he's going to be champ sometime soon, except for the fact that Wrestling Observer Newsletter and Bleacher Report are both reporting that the plan for SummerSlam is once again Brock Lesnar versus Roman Reigns for the Universal title, which is so fucking disappointing. I cannot even express how upset I am with this. You have so much good stuff going on in NXT and Impact and Ring of Honor and New Japan, and just WWE keeps doing the same thing over and 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 over again, and it is horrible. Look up the definition of insanity in the dictionary and you will see a picture of Vince McMahon. Anyway, let's move on. Number 1 thing was Finn Balor versus Kevin Owens, and what was a really good match, main event. Finn Balor, after the match was over, hit a coup de grace off of the top of the ladder onto Kevin Owens, and then he went up and grabbed the Money in the Bank briefcase, which means he's probably not winning, but this wasn't the go-home show, so it's not necessarily a guarantee, and it was a fun way to end a mediocre episode of Raw. Ladies and gentlemen, that was your Raw rundown. We thought the episode was fine, not their best, not their worst. Let us know your thoughts on social media, and speaking of social media, it's time to say hi to the people. This week on High to the People, we want to know your thoughts on what will be the better show, Dominion, presented by New Japan Pro Wrestling, or NXT TakeOver Chicago. We'll be running a Twitter poll for the next 72 hours and discussing the results here on our show next week, but let us know exactly what you think about that. You can vote on Twitter by tweeting at us and using the hashtag #HotTag, or email us at tagmeinbro@gmail.com if you still use electronic mail to share your opinion and maybe have your thoughts read out on the show. And every week we read out some of our favorite responses. Now let's talk about the results of last week's topic. We asked, is Finn Balor being built or buried? 500 people voted, 51% said built, and 49% said buried. This is the closest poll we have ever run by far, and we were so fascinated by how close the result of this was that we are talking about it in the main event. So we will get to the discussion of this result then, but now we are going to take a spin down to the indie corner.
Bullet Club is fine.
This week on the Indie Corner, we're talking about the final from the Best of the Super Juniors 25, which was Ishimori versus Takahashi, and it was spectacular. They put on an absolute masterpiece that I could not recommend highly enough. So there was this submission segment that really stood out to me, where Ishimori has got Takahashi in his submission. He's got the arm locked. It looks like Takahashi's shoulder is about to pop out, and the crowd is so raucous and into it that in a way that I've never seen them cheer in the WWE. WWE has absolutely butchered the effect of submissions, because rarely does anyone tap out, and they presented it as such an embarrassment if you tap out that almost nobody even wants to see it. Whereas in Japan, they were just getting behind this whole section and cheering on the hero, and at the same time cheering on, you know, the villain. It was so cool, John, wasn't it?
It was really, really cool, and they kind of did the same thing again when Takahashi had Ishimori in the triangle, and Red Shoes was going for the arm drop test, and Ishimori just at the last second lifts his arm up because he just doesn't want to lose, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful.
It was so good. There was such innovation in this match as well, like things that I had never seen before from either of these guys or in my life at all. Not to mention, the commentary really built it as a true competition between equals, which they don't do often enough in WWE, and we've discussed that before. I really have a problem with it, but in New Japan, the commentators sell everything like it's going to be the last blow that anyone can ever take. Not to mention that the finish was just awesome. They traded almost hitting their finishers until finally Takahashi hit the time bomb, and it was just so cool, and the fans were so behind him. And of course now he'll be going on to face Will Ospreay for that junior heavyweight title at Dominion this weekend, and that match will also prove to be spectacular, I'm sure. So that has been the Indie Corner for this week. If you're not watching New Japan Pro Wrestling or non-WWE products, you absolutely should be, because WWE right now is not perfect, and some of the stuff going on around the world is really, really, really excelente. So check it out and make sure you do not miss Dominion in Osaka Hall this weekend.
It's Rusev Day. It's Rusev Day.
And now it's time for the main event!
In the main event today, we are going to have a very, very interesting discussion about what influences perspective in wrestling. Now, let me give you the backdrop for why we're talking about this today. So, last week in the High to the People poll, we asked everyone, what their view was on Finn Balor, his current storyline and booking, and whether or not it was building him up or burying him, because he has had a very interesting sort of run of matches and story in the past couple of weeks since he finished up his bouts for the Intercontinental Championship. So the decision was pretty much 50-50. It was 51-49, but it was 50-50 for the majority of the week, and narrowly the idea of him being built won out. But what stood out to John and myself is that people were so divided on this question. How can the wrestling community be viewing the same event, the same series of matches, and the same series of promos, and yet be divided almost right down the middle on whether or not it is actually good or bad for a wrestler's career. So what we're going to do today is discuss, what about this particular situation could influence people in one direction or the other, and maybe discuss, some other things that John and I agree or disagree on with other booking that have built and or buried other persons. So John, why don't you start us off? What are some of the things about this booking with Finn Balor that you think has led people to believe that he is being buried, for starters?
I think that a lot of people might think, well, it's Braun. Braun fights jobbers. We've seen a lot of times Braun fighting just common local enhancement talent, lower mid-carders, real jobbers, and so they see Finn now in this position and they think, oh, well, Finn's a jobber now, he's never going to get the Universal Championship, blah, blah, blah. But I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment. I think that they're really showing off what Finn can do against a much, much bigger man. I mean, we know that Finn's not going to beat Braun on Raw. I mean, who has beat Braun, period? Roman, Brock, and Kalisto, but that's besides the point. We don't need to talk about that. But I don't think that it's necessarily a burial for someone to lose to somebody who beats everybody.
Now, what I think is interesting about that and we said last week we both think Finn's being built, but for the purpose of this discussion, we gotta play both sides of the fence here. Now, I understand because it has happened before in WWE where a beloved babyface who people believe should be at the top of the card has been put in competitive bouts with super heavyweights and not won but been made to look good but have never actually gotten the push they deserve. One that I remember very recently, not actually from the main roster but from NXT rather, was when Ty Dillinger kept fighting Bobby Roode and everyone was like, this is it, this is Dillinger's final push to the NXT Championship, and he kept losing but being made to look great and he never got the push that he deserved, and eventually of course he came up to the main roster and has since done very little. But so I get how people could twist this as, oh, well, we've seen this before. Who cares if he's looking good? He's still not winning. He's still being positioned as, basically, I think those who view this as a burial think that Finn is being positioned against Braun to make Braun look better rather than Finn being positioned against Braun to make Finn look better, which is how I, of course, have viewed it. And obviously, not getting the wins, being against Braun are all part of it, but also a lot of people feel that Finn shouldn't be in this situation at all and that he really should be chasing the Universal title and getting the rematch that he deserves and has never had, which makes no sense. They keep mentioning that he never got it, but they don't actually give it to him. It's really poor writing on WWE's behalf. And of course, everyone on Raw in the main event is in a holding pattern until Roman apparently gets the title from Brock, but even though they won't actually put it on Roman, it's so confusing and asinine to me. So let's, instead of talking about the negatives for a moment, switch back over to the positives. And what about this storyline and booking would make you think that Finn is being built, John?
Well, I think there's a more clear answer to that in that WWE presented their final match in a way that 100% looked like Finn was going to win. Now, I know some of you will say, well, we don't know if that would have put Braun away. I mean, he was going to hit him with a second coup de grace, but he could have kicked out, or something could have happened. But as it is, Kevin Owens interfered when it looked like Finn was going to pick up a win over Braun. So that, in a way, presents Finn as a credible threat to Braun, who is a credible threat to everyone. So Finn looks strong in that case. And if that's not being built, then I don't really know what is.
Not to mention that Finn did qualify for Money in the Bank. He is going to be in that match. And it's hard to say that someone is being buried when they're being put into that match, because it's basically saying that while WWE might not see you as the number one contender right now, or even as heavyweight championship material, you have the potential to be heavyweight championship material. I do truly think that's how they view it. That's how I view it as well. And you might disagree with that, but I think that is the spin on it that the company would give.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a huge opportunity for him, and honestly, if they didn't like him, they wouldn't put him in that match. I think it's that simple. They're not going to put lesser talent into a match as big and with the history of Money in the Bank. Even if he doesn't win, I mean, I think he would be a fantastic Mr. Money in the Bank. Whether or not he will win is up to creative, but it's a good spot, and it's hard to say that it's not a good spot.
Do you think that the division and the answer to this poll is evidence of why WWE struggles so much to appeal to their audience? Like, this is a situation that you and I have been watching unfold and have been like, wow, they're absolutely doing the right thing. We're super happy with it. But 50% of the audience thinks that it's crap and that they're ruining Finn's character. Now, is division, and the WWE audience is huge, and we always say you can't please everyone. And obviously there are some things that make people universally more happy. Like, obviously people are super on board with Seth Rollins right now. We ran a poll a little while back about who should be the face of the company, and he took like 60% of the vote, and over a bunch of other really big name people. But for the most part, it seems to be really divided. So if you're WWE, how do you decide on a direction to go in when you know that basically 50% of the people in your audience are going to disagree with it? And the Roman chants are a perfect example of this. Like, basically half the audience hates Roman and half the audience likes him. So if you're WWE, how do you say, maybe we should pull the plug or turn around on this booking? And I don't know if it's actually half and half, but it's evidence to me that this is not as simple as we on the internet and we podcasters would like to make it seem. And of course, we've said that before, and there's something to be said about good writing and story continuity and logical booking. But that aside, when you have such a divided fan base, it complicates things, or at least perhaps makes you second guess yourself. And if you're Vince McMahon, you're probably going to default to, and you do default to based on what we've seen, things that have been successful for you previously and made you money previously. John?
Well, you brought up the Roman chants example, which I think is an interesting comparison. The thing with the Roman chants is half of those people love Roman, and half of those people despise everything about him. But with this poll and the Balor thing, I don't necessarily think that people are turning on Balor. I think everyone in this poll, or at least a majority of people in this poll, are firmly behind him as a performer and as a character. They just are split on whether or not they like the decisions that are being made, which I don't know if it's a problem with the creative team, the writing team, or whatever, but something about it is dividing people, and something they've done along the line with Balor's character has led them to this split.
Could it be just the nature of wrestling fans that, like, people, we're just such a wide base that we're inevitably going to be divided, and that you truly can't please everyone? I mean, I even just in this morning tweeting about Takahashi versus Ishimori and talking about how great it was, there were a huge number of people who said how much they didn't like it. I mean, they're seeing, I believe, and I have discussed this before on the show, that there are objective principles in wrestling, as there are with any form of art, which I do believe wrestling is a form of art. I believe it's a form of theater. And there are certain things that make certain matches objectively good or bad. But of course, with any form of art, there are also subjective principles to it. And maybe it is just that the majority of wrestling fans, or at least the more casual fans, don't think about the objective things and simply think about how it makes them feel subjectively, and their own personal takeaway, and that is always going to cause division amongst a fan base.
Yeah, like you said, it's it's such a wide and large mass of people that there's so many different opinions and ideas, not even just about wrestling, but about everything. I mean, the wrestling fan base is one of the most amazingly diverse groups that I've been a part of, and so you're not going to please everyone.
No, and I think that's why this, wrestling is for everyone movement is so important. Not only is it about acceptance of all types of wrestling fans, regardless of race, religion, sexuality, sexual orientation, gender, etc., but it's also about being accepting of all opinions, even ones that are contrary to our own, and making sure that we understand that wrestling is not about shouting down someone else's opinion that you disagree with, but rather celebrating your own opinion and celebrating the fact that people enjoy what they enjoy. It might not be the same as you, but in the end of the day, we all enjoy wrestling, and that is what matters most. And I think that's probably a good place to leave this discussion, because the truth is you can't please everyone, but we're all wrestling fans, and you just gotta find what you like and be happy with that. So thank you, everyone, for listening to this main event. Now let's finish this episode the way that we do every single week with our Stars of the Night. Here are our Stars of the Night for Monday Night Raw, June 4th, 2018 edition.
You just made the list!
Number 3 is the B Team. They've secured a spot on this list for becoming the number 1 contenders for the Raw Tag Team Championships. And what has been a very weak tag division, they have at least been a fun comedy act, and I'm looking forward to their shenanigans against the Deleters of Worlds. Number 2 is Finn Balor. After a really good match with Kevin Owens, he stood tall in the end, landing that coup de grace off the top of the ladder and hoisting the Money in the Bank briefcase over the top of his head. And finally, the number 1 star of the week is Braun Strowman, and I think this is the first time in a really long time that Seth Rollins has not made the list, but his segment was for once not particularly interesting, regardless of his wrestling ability, which is of course great, but Braun Strowman earned this spot for what was a fun match against Bobby Roode and a really, really funny spot, smashing that ladder with his hands. I'm sure we will be giving it for a very, very long time. Braun Strowman, you are the number 1 star. You deserve it. Well, that will do it for us here at Tag Me In Bro. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Tag Me In Bro and join our over 5,000 followers in various wrestling discussions, polls, debates, and chats. And of course, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, TuneIn, Google Play, or wherever podcasts are found. Please as well go on to iTunes if you enjoyed this show and give us a 5-star review, because iTunes gives preferential treatment to those shows with 5 stars and it helps us out greatly. As always, we're eager to hear your thoughts, comments, questions, answers. So please let us know what you liked, what you hated, and what you could give a fuck about. For my co-host, John Tantillo, I have been Joe Tantillo. Thanks for listening to Tag Me In Bro, and we will see you tomorrow for SmackDown Live with Taryn O'Connor, and next week with predictions for Money in the Bank. Goodbye, Universe.
Goodbye, Universe.